is a bit odd. And my kids were saying that this afternoon, or late this morning, all confused on time now, coming together at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, but I am glad that everybody was able to safely get out, and thankful for that. So it's good to see everybody today. I want to be encouraging to have your Bibles open to the book of Hebrews, and chapter 10, we'll be there in just a moment. Chapter 11, rather, Hebrews 11. We've been talking about on Sunday morning, the past few mornings, past few Sundays, as we've entered into this new year, about some things that I believe are highly important for us to remember. Some foundational things, things that should be always in our present thought, in our consideration. And we talked about the idea of doing what's right and doing what's good, and not waiting to do what's right and what's good. That there is a tendency that we have sometimes, especially when it comes to spiritual things, to put them off and say, well, there's a better day that we'll do that on. There's a better day we'll go talk to that person. There's a better day somewhere down the road, unnamed, undecided, undetermined, that we probably will never get to because we're just pushing it off rather than doing what we need to be doing. Last week we talked about the gospel and how we need the gospel. You need the gospel. I need it. Our families need it. Our neighbors need it. They need to hear it. They need to be exposed to it. They need to see it lived out in our life. They need an opportunity to come into contact with it. Because ultimately, Jesus died for a reason. Because without Him, we have no real life. And we certainly don't have life eternal. This morning, we're going to talk about the idea of trust and how it relates back to some of these things. So we're going to talk mainly how it relates to faith. And we know that faith is a pillar when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to a relationship with God. And we have some ideas in the world about faith. And this is the way I like to put it. Is if you took belief and you took this word trust, and we understand both of those. We know what it means to believe something. At least I think we do. We know what it means to trust someone. And if you take those two ideas and you melt them together, then you have faith. But without trust, there is no faith. Faith has to carry beyond just a simple understanding of, yeah, I believe that is right, or that's the right person, or that's the right name, or that's the right idea. It's something that allows us to trust in God, even when our circumstances and our surroundings are going to tell us something different. So we're here in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, and we are looking at the idea of faith. And I said 10 because I have the wrong verse in my PowerPoint for some reason. But chapter 11, and we're talking about this beautiful passage of faith. And he talks about it being substance and evidence of things not seen, of things hoped for. And then he starts getting into examples with Abel and with Noah. And then we get down to verse 6. And he says, but without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. And again, this should be 11:6. I don't know why I put 10 there. Just one of those moments, I guess. But think about what he is saying here as the Hebrew writer is in the midst of talking about some of these spectacular events and people that we know of from our history. He says, for faith to be pleasing to God at least, we have to believe not only that He is God, but that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Now, this isn't the idea of, listen, if you seek God, God's going to rain down money and wealth and so forth in your name or in your life or whatever it may be. That's not what he's talking about. Some of these people we read were blessed very richly in this life physically. Some of them were not. But all of them were blessed richly in God. In the book of Genesis in chapter 15, as God is restating His promises to Abraham. It's still called Abram at that point. But he's promised him a son. He still doesn't have one. He says to God, look, all I've got is Eliezer, who's the head of my house. And there's no blessing here because I have no heir, no son. And God tells him, among other things, where He restates the promise, He says, I am your great reward. In other words, God told Abraham, God is his reward. God himself is the thing that he needs to trust in. It's the center of everything that would be of value to him. And he needs to be reminded of that. And the Hebrew writer, I think, is trying to remind us as we read through this and as we study this of the same thing, the same idea. It's not enough just to believe that God is. But where faith takes us and we're able to walk in it is that we know whatever the circumstance is, that if I walk with God and trust in God and put my hope in God, God's going to reward me. It may not be in physical ways, but in other words, I'm going to be victorious in this. I get a chance to see what victory looks like on the other side of this. And so many opportunities throughout Scripture, of course, right here in Hebrews 11, we can really stress this point. Noah had never seen a flood. Certainly not a flood that could cover mountaintops. Noah had never seen or experienced anything like this in his life, and yet God tells him, I'm going to flood the earth. I'm going to wipe it clean. And I want you to build this ark. 100 years he labors on it. We say he's a man of faith. In the text, if we go back and look at what he has to say about Noah, verse 7, right after our verse up here, by faith Noah being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. And it seems so nice and so wrapped up. It's a nice little package there. Noah was faithful. Noah, listen, 100 years. A lot happens in 100 years. Whole families come and go in 100 years. Nations rise and fall in 100 years. Time changes. And yet for 100 years, every day, he labored on this because he had faith. Everything around him, I use this every time we talk about Noah. I cannot imagine what the village people must have been saying about him. I mean, here is Noah out in the middle of the wilderness, nowhere by a big, large body of water, building this boat. It's not a boat, it's an ark. The difference between a boat and an ark that has no power. No oars, no sails, no engine, no anything to power it, okay? Just a little food for thought. But building this big vessel out there in the middle of the wilderness. And I can only imagine if he was our neighbor and we were living there, what we would be thinking. Well, Noah, he was a good guy, but maybe not. Maybe the elevator's not going to the top. Maybe he has some issues. Maybe he thinks he's. Can you imagine what was being said? Could you imagine what was being said about him and his family in a generation, in a place where God said their thoughts were continuously evil? But for 100 years, he trusted that God was going to do what he said he was going to do. He trusted in the end he would be the beneficiary. He would receive a reward, the saving of his family. But without faith, it is impossible. Not just to receive these things, but it's impossible to please him. There's nothing we can offer God. This is one of those unique things that I think maybe we don't spend as much time on. Maybe we do. I don't know. I don't think so. I can't offer God enough money. Everything I own, he owns already. And he could take it away just like that. Or he could bless someone else with it just like that. Job is a great example of that, but I mean, there's so much examples, and we just need just our eyes and our hands and our ears, our senses to know that is true in this world. God doesn't need anything from me other than for me to follow him, and there's an element of friendship there, an element of relationship that he's desiring from us. But yet I can still please him. And so can you. But only through faith. Let's dissect that just a little bit more. Let's turn to 1 Timothy chapter 4. 1 Timothy chapter 4. And as you're looking at this, Paul writing, of course, to Timothy, he has left him at Ephesus. He has trained him. He has walked with him. He has seen many things done at the hands and heard many things said by Paul. And he has confidence in this young man. I said, obviously, where he's at, there's a lot of problems. And we have to see that as we read what Paul's telling Timothy. But we get over to chapter 4, 1 Timothy. And there's a lot of good stuff in this chapter, but we're going to be down in verse 10. I was in 2 Timothy, I apologize. 1 Timothy 4. In verse 10 he says, "For to this end," what have he been talking about? He's been talking about exercising godliness. He said physical exercise is profitable a little, but godliness is profitable in all things. Verse 10, "For to this end we both labor and suffer reproach, because we trust in the living God, who is the Savior of all men, especially of those who believe." You know, we could dissect Paul's life or Timothy's life, and we could rehearse all the things we know about him. That he was shipwrecked, and that he was snake-bitten, that he had people take an oath to take his life. There was 40 men who took an oath. I think it was 40 men. And they took an oath to not eat or drink until they had taken the life of Paul. Well, either they didn't make it very well, or they broke that oath, because they didn't take the life of Paul. But there were people who wanted to, even in the church, add to his change, as he tells the church in Philippi. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but I kind of get it. That there are those people sometimes in life that no matter how good you try to be and how good you try to do and what you try to be involved in, they seem to always want to try to just hurt you. Paul, unfortunately, recognized this, seen this, experienced this, even from what should be his brethren. So we can rehearse a whole lot of stuff about Paul, how he was somebody under the Jewish system. Son of a Pharisee of a Pharisee of the tribe of Benjamin, as he says in Galatians. He was a man of prominence. He was a man that suggested of wealth because of that prominence. He was the next up-and-coming star in the Jewish system. And yet he laid it down to follow after Christ, to the point where he's even at times having to take away from ministering so he could build some tents so he could care for himself and Luke and Timothy. And he writes to Timothy, and I think Timothy, in the midst of this letter, and the second one too, you can see there's a lot of problems. There's life happening here with Timothy. What does he tell him? "For to this end, we both labor and suffer reproach, because we trust in the living God." It'd be all too easy for us to say, I'm just going to stay home. There's work to be done. I'm just going to stay home. There's a better day tomorrow. There's a better day next week. There's a better day next month. I'll be in a better place financially in a year from now. I'll be whatever. It's endless. It's never ending. There's always going to be something happening. Paul said in the midst of that, he didn't stop, because he was trusting in something. The question is, do we trust in the living God? We trust in a lot of things in this life. Some of them are deserving of our trust, some of them not. Every day we get into a car, and thousands of people, or at least hundreds of people locally, depending on how far we drive, we trust that we've never met. To obey the laws, to stay on their side of the road, stop at stoplights. We trust that when we go to work that put in our time and punch the clock and all this, that our employer is going to do as they said they were going to do, and they're going to pay us what they said they were going to pay us. Our kids, they live in constant trust that they're going to be taken care of, not even contemplating what all is involved sometimes and what we have to do for them, and yet we live the same way before God. sometimes taking for granted all the things God does for us. But do we trust Him with our life? There's a sermon I did years and years and years ago. I remember delivering at Mount Vernon on a Sunday night, in which I talked about, and this is from, we looked at this passage not long ago briefly, but from the book of Ezekiel, when God has given this beautiful picture. He had been the whole book talking about judgment and about all their sins and about all their vacancy and about all their decadence and how it's all going to be crushed and destroyed. And then he gets in this beautiful picture of hope. And of course, to the Jewish audience, what would you use? You would restoring of Israel, the restoring of the temple. And he uses this picture of the temple, so it's a very unique picture because there's a river that starts running from the altar. If you might remember us looking at this not long ago, but as it goes forward, it gets wider, it gets deeper, but there are no contributaries. In other words, the water is coming in from anywhere else. It just keeps getting deeper and wider. And he measures it out. He goes so far, and it's so deep, and it's waist deep, and then he can't stand in it. Then it's only passable by a boat or by swimming. And the whole point is that out from the altar, out from the temple, is this blessing that flows. Of course, we got to know that it's us. The temple is us. John chapter 4 is the Samaritan woman. He said, "I will raise up in you, if you drink of this water." He's talking about himself. An everlasting fountain of water that will just spring up to everlasting life. Do we trust Him with our life, though? Not just with our debt. Do we trust Him with our life? Do we trust that if we do God's things God's way, if we live life God's way, that He is going to reward us? That is, He's going to bless us? Or do we only trust Him with our debt? Everything else we want to control. Everything else we want to do it our way. Paul said, we live this way. We go through reproach. We struggle. We labor. But we trust. That's how we can do it. One more passage from 1 Timothy, this time chapter 6. So if you want to go to the end of that little book. And he's talking to the rich here, but he's going to give us a principle that I think needs to be remembered. This is something, again, we take for granted. We don't understand. We don't comprehend. We don't have a point of reference to truly grasp this. But if you work part-time at $7.50 an hour, 20 hours a week, you make more than 65% of the world's population makes in a week. We are so blessed that we don't understand how blessed we are. And that's not to minimize anybody's financial struggles here. I'm just saying that we have come to a place where we are so blessed. We are so blessed in this life that we are arguing over things that we're creating things to argue about. We're creating problems in our society that never were a problem because we have all this time as a society and as a people to contemplate and to worry about things that 100 years ago people were just worried about putting food on their plate. So I think this still applies to us even if we don't consider ourselves to be rich. Because we certainly have been blessed. But verse 17, 1 Timothy 6, command those who are rich in this present age not to be haughty, nor to trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who gives us richly all things to enjoy. Money is a lot of things in this life. It's mobility, it's security, it's future. It's a way that we invest. It's a way that we, interact. But it's not something we should trust in. Not in place of God, anyway. It's uncertain. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We don't know financially or economically or whatever tomorrow may bring. We know that. That's why sometimes we get anxious and we get fearful. And yet, the whole time, God has been telling us, trust me. He was here long before there was a United States. He was here long before there was a Western society. He was here long before our troubles ever came on the scene. And He'll be here long after they are. I've said this on a couple of different occasions, and we're going to come back to Hebrews 11 to wrap ourselves up here in just a moment. But we live in this material world, and it's really hard to escape it. And I don't think God has asked us to completely escape it. He's not asked us just to give away everything and move out to a cave somewhere and set up camp there. But we do need to understand that the things of this world are temporary. That's why the things of this world always leave us and are always lacking. They're lacking to make us truly happy. They're lacking to make us truly secure. They're lacking to make us truly whatever it may be. Because they are limited by nature. God is eternal. He offers things that are eternal. Happiness, purpose, meaning, hope. What do we trust in? What's our faith in? Hebrews 11, verse 6. Hebrew writer tells us, but without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe. Must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. I'm of a simple mind on some of this. But I simply just believe this. God is not going to shortchange you. If we kind of have this, well, if I give this, I'm going to go without. I'm going to not have. Who told you that? In the book of 1 Chronicles, there's a prophet. Sorry, 2 Chronicles. His name's Elisha. He comes to a widow's house. It's been a really, really hard time for Israel, for Judah. There's a drought. There's not food. This woman has a son, and she's a widow trying to care for him. So no husband, no family to help them, support them. He asked her because he'd been traveling to prepare a meal, and she said, "I only have enough meal for me and my son to eat one last time." And she puts it in the most pressing and desperate way before we die. You all may be familiar with the story, but Elijah tells her that God will provide. And she decides to take that last bit that she would have for her and her son and make it to feed the prophet of God. And when she does, every time she goes back to that, which would probably be like a clay jar, there's more meal there. And it never runs out. And the whole point was, and the whole picture was, is that when you trust in God, when you invest in God, He's not going to leave you short-handed. In the New Testament, there's a kind of a similar story, not exactly the same, but on a similar line. And Jesus is outside the temple. And to understand this a little bit, the temple had its main area, and then it had, by that time, different courts. They had the court of Israel, where the men of Israel would come to worship. There was the court of women, where the women would come to worship. That is, if they came by themselves. And then there was the court of the nations, where the Gentiles or the proselytes would come in to worship. And these courts weren't physical structures. The actual temple was, but they were kind of divided by these big like tent structures, big curtains. And they could kind of see through. It wasn't a solid wall. And they had a lot of air to pass through and all that. And Jesus is having a conversation, and there's some Gentiles involved in part of the conversation, and there's some others there, and he's watching as the people come in and they give. And of course, there are people with means, and they're giving their tithes or whatever they're giving. And then this widow comes up. She has a mite. Is that right? 2 mites. Thank you. That's all she's got. And she puts it in. And Jesus uses that woman to teach her, to teach those people that are around him, to teach us ever since then. She gave up everything she had. And he noticed. They gave out of their wealth. She gave out of her poverty. She gave everything. Who do you think was more blessed in the end? But this is not about how much money you have in the bank or how much money you put in, contribution. It's about who do we trust in life. Are we trusting ourselves? Or are we trusting God? We're back in Hebrews 11, verse 6 one more time. But without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Not on the side, not part-time. There's a poem, and you all have heard me reference it before. It's called $3 Worth of God. And I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. You can look this up. There's a couple different versions because it's an older poem. But the poem goes something like this. I want $3 worth of God, please. Not enough to make me uncomfortable. Not enough to make me change. Not enough to make me change the way I see. Not enough, I want $3 worth of God, please. Maybe in a paper sack. Maybe some small amount that I can carry on my back. But not enough for me to reach out to the broken or to the immigrant. Just $3 worth of God, please. And it has another verse or two there, but hopefully you get the point. And that's unfortunately how we so often want to worship God. Just a little bit. Just enough to secure maybe what we think of for our future or for the life past here. Instead of our life right now. Who do you trust with your life? Who do you trust with your conversations, your relationships? Who do you trust when those voices maybe kind of debate your head of what you're going to do in the moment, in the choice? Who do we trust? Faith without trust. It's a pit. It's a pit of doubt. It's a pit of a constant reflection to the negative. Oh, I should believe in God. I should believe in God. I should believe in God. Then I don't believe in God. Do you trust God? In so many illustrations we could use, but one final one. In the end of all of our philosophy or ways of life, or however you want to view that, what's most important and the most important, and the things that you would want and the things that you would dream of having, and the things that, if you could be king for a day or queen for a day, the things that you would mold and shape in your life. You can think of whatever that picture is. How can you achieve that truly without God? This world is a fleeting thing. I think it's meant to be enjoyed. Even in our text in 1 Timothy 6, he tells us that those things that we have, that we enjoy, come from God. But we need to make sure that we're trusting in the right things. And this morning, if you're with us and maybe you have this opportunity to consider your own life, your own walk, and maybe there's someone here who has not obeyed the gospel, they haven't fully put their life in his hands, I want to encourage you to give great thought and consideration to it. Maybe there's someone here that needs a prayer as a church, or there's some other way that we can come beside you. We, of course, want to offer you the opportunity to let those needs be known as we stand together and sing a song of invitation. Praise Christ.